Andrew, thank you for being with us today for the interview. And I hope editor of Business Insider Taiwan. Today we'll be interviewing you several questions regarding to Taiwan's position in the AI race. And secondly, how will humans' role be after AI can tackle most of the daily tasks for us? And thirdly, what's your opinion regarding to the AI bubble rumor in the market?
Sounds great.
Great. I will start with the first one. As you may know that Taiwan is a global leader in semiconductor manufacturing, and which is the fundamental hardware for AI. And in the next phase of the AI race, how critical will the synergy between hardware innovation, like advanced chips and cutting-edge models developments, like GPT's new large language models be? Beyond just manufacturing, what unique technique does Taiwan's hardware strength give it in the global competition for the AI application and deployment? And what do you think are some of the potential Taiwan could be doing in Taiwan's AI industrial ecosystem, but haven't yet been put enough focus on?
Yeah, first off, Taiwan is wonderfully positioned because they are the world leader for manufacturing, highly sophisticated components like, microprocessors, et cetera, and the GPUs and everything. And I think that even though we're seeing people trying to build them in other countries and do that, Taiwan's got such a leading advantage over that and such a concentration of expertise. And it's such a growing market. It just seems like Taiwan's future is only going to continue to get bigger and bigger. And Taiwan is just such an important part of the entire ecosystem. In China, they're trying to build their own chips. The United States talked about building their own stuff, and Europe maybe some point will try to do that. But I think that's just going to be the natural evolution of what happens as things continue to grow. And I think that Taiwan is just well positioned to still be the dominant player there. There doesn't mean reason why that's not going to happen. I think the next phase that we're starting to see is that we built chips and then figured out the applications that go on top of it. And, going back to the days of, the 80s and the 90s with operating systems, and really you were just trying to do that. Then as graphics became bigger and there became a bigger demand for that, but was still kind of like, you would say, hey, this is what the chips are going to do. Now you try to figure out what applications you can build on that. With AI, we now have a kind of an idea of understanding where inference is headed, where training is headed. And now we're seeing this sort of bifurcation between just one size fits all chips that have just increased, clock rates and whatever. Now we need chips that are really good for running ChatGPT, or we need chips that are really good at training models. And I think that you're seeing the entire ecosystem trying to be more proactive and trying to make a guess at where things were going to be, where things are going to be in 5 years. By comparison, if you look back when Apple wanted to do the iPhone and they looked for manufacturing partners, Intel turned them down. Intel was, dominant American company in microprocessors at the time and for that area, and they thought the market was too small. It turned out they were wrong. And I think the shift we've seen now is that people see the trade, and that should have been obvious to Intel, is to see that things were moving toward phones, that was obvious. Now I think that Taiwanese manufacturers understand, and people who are doing, fab understand where we're headed, and they're making investments to try to be ahead of the curve. I mean, chipset have always tried to do that, but have often made very weird or wrong guesses like this. So I think that's the thing now is we're seeing, it's a big cooperation between international companies working with Taiwan to try to figure out where things are going. So I'd say that's the big trend I'm seeing now is just this, hey, we have an idea where the future's headed. We know that OpenAI has announced just really ambitious rollouts of how much compute they want to build. Yes. And there's also talk about building devices, and that's going to be all sorts of companies are going to want to do that. So I think that Taiwan's in a wonderful position because as the world leader in manufacturing these kind of semiconductors and also understanding where things are headed.
You think that Taiwan should be kept focusing on what they are doing? Or do you think there's some potentials Taiwan could maybe start to develop for great advantage we've already been holding on?
Taiwan's got an incredible amount of expertise in manufacturing the most important economic driver we've ever created. Yes. But, there was a period in the 80s and 90s where just production of memory was like a big deal. And then Japan overproduced memory and you started to get gluts and memory prices went up and down because, it turned out that there was a predictable sort of rate at which memory would be deployed and used. And they were trying to figure that out. With intelligence, it's different. The ceiling for the demand for intelligence is something we'll probably never meet. I would say that in Taiwan situation is that right now, the way we do chip fab works really well. We know that there's, always people worry about Moore's Law and where things are headed. I do think thinking about more innovative strategies. I do think about, more, where Taiwan wants to be thinking about too is that, following what other companies have done is to say how much further down the application layer can they get? It's one thing to say we do the fab. It's another thing to start to thinking about, okay, should we be financing data centers? Should there be an active involvement in saying, okay, we don't just want to make money every time a wafer leaves a facility. You want to make money when that wafer is being used somewhere. And so I've seen some efforts from companies from Taiwan thinking a lot more about how to capture more of the value.
Yes, I think Taiwan has been raising a conversation regarding whether Taiwan should build its own data center or perhaps even start to develop more on the software parts. Yeah, but Taiwan should definitely keep their focus on the semiconductor manufacturing for sure. We're just wondering that to secure more properly how Taiwan can do.
The old idea of comparative advantages, one country focuses on one thing, another country does this, which I do believe is true. But the one thing is you have to think about disruptions and changes. If all of a sudden and again, Taiwanese companies are making investments in photonics and stuff like that. So I don't want to be like, oh, you guys should. Everybody there knows better than I am. So I'm just saying as my observers. And I do think those are smart bets, is to sort of say, okay, one, continue that, but also be aware of what are disruptive technologies and also understand there's a lot of value. One, in, we just watched NVIDIA, reach $5 trillion in valuation, but also they're making big investments in trying to own other parts of the ecosystem. And I think that Taiwan, it's the same thing. I'd say that historically, the challenge for Asian countries has often been software development, has been at the application layer, which seemed well positioned to sort of take over. And there are exceptions to that, absolutely. But I'd say but that's an area that's also probably worth trying to think a lot more about.
That's very insightful. How do you think after all those investments pour into this AI tech companies, and that I know you've mentioned once in your podcast with Justin Young about how AI sometimes will outpace utilities. How do you distinguish between speculate hype and fundamental long-term value in those AI bubble investments?
It's the $1 trillion question right now. I think that smart people can kind of understand directionally where things are headed, but not everybody will agree. In the mid 1990s, if you were smart, you knew the internet was inevitable, right? That was obvious. Now, some people really thought it was not only inevitable, but it was all imminent, and you had investments in some businesses that were probably too soon. I've heard people break down like the pets.com analogy or whatever, and
yes,
and some people are like, oh, it wasn't actually a bad idea after all because of Amazon. I'm like, well, their initial model was to sell 10-kilo bags of dog food that cost way too much to ship. And I don't think there was a lot of runway to figure out, how to master like what, Amazon had a better way to get to the future. And I think sometimes we might say we all agree on the future, but we have different ideas of how we're going to get there. And that's what's up for debate. And sometimes they're just bad ideas. So we knew in the mid 90s, if you didn't think the internet was going to be big, you were crazy. And very prominent people were like, I don't know about this internet thing, whatever. And it's a lot like the AI skepticism now. It's like, we'll just have, nobody wanted to put their credit card online in 1995. Now physical credit cards seem gross, because we did solve for trust. We did solve for that. We didn't get rid of all fraud, but we brought the fraud down to a low point. We're comfortable doing that. AI hallucination, people are like, AI hallucinates. It's a lot like credit card trust. Well, we keep improving on it year over year, and now it's way better than it was just a few years ago. So I think that we can all directionally agree that the future is going to involve more intelligence, more compute than what we're using now. The question is, how much over what time frame, and is investing early a mistake or not? And is investing, are all of the bets that people are making going to play out? Well, obviously, no. There are companies right now that I think are run by people who are very smart. They're too soon or too wrong, or they're too late. They're trying to create a market for something that they're trying to create a business on something that probably won't be as big of a business, or they're not going to get the share of it they want. I've seen humanoid robotics companies that have promised things, but I don't think they're on anywhere path to go get it because they're focusing on the wrong thing. But I do think humanoid robotics will be a thing by the end of the decade. I think that by the end of the decade, they'll be there. Do I think that every company right now trying to build them is making sense? No, I think only a small percentage of them are. So I think that there is investment in AI that's ridiculous. I think there's some really high valuations, some companies that I think are going to come crashing down. And I think people are going to start to go, oh, well, when we had the internet, the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, some people are like, well, the internet's a bust. Like, no, bad businesses are always going to bust, but we just see it faster. So I think that, we're going to see, this continuous growth. I think we'll have disruptions. I think the first big bust we get, a lot of people are going to be like, well, I guess that's it. But then next thing you know, things continue up. And the valuations now actually aren't as crazy as they were in the dot-com bubble. People forget about that. Like, there were some companies that were like, I want to say like Cisco or something had like $1 trillion, had like the most insane multiple you could ever imagine.
Yes.
And it was hard to imagine. We haven't seen that yet. The multiples may seem a little bit crazy, but not as crazy. I don't think we're building enough compute. I think we need way more data centers. I think that is absolutely going to have demand for it, because the beautiful thing now is I could produce as many memory chips as I wanted, but there weren't going to be enough things in the world to store on them at that time. If you spun up 10 more gigawatts of data centers tomorrow, I could have the AI figure out what to do with it, but I already know what to do with it. And that's where we're in right now, where we know how to create economically useful things with it.
You think that the memory cards back then didn't have enough of the storage place compared to now we have data center for our GPUs? Is what distinguished?
They had for them to be useful. I had to be able to put them into a camera. I had to put them into a thing. I had to be by themselves. They weren't useful. A data center, now AI is at a point where AI knows how to use AI.
Yes.
Right. So if I had a 1 gigawatt data center right now, I could sit down with GPT-5 and say, hey, listen, help me come up with a bunch of experiments to go run, or come up with some new service. OpenAI launched Sora, the app, a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
And it's been insane. The biggest restriction was basically being able to have the compute. And that's a thing that came out of nowhere that says, oh, we have this really cool way to use compute.
Yes.
And so there are all these different services and stuff that we would want right now, but we just don't have the compute for it.
That's for those companies who actually knows what they are doing and knows how to deploy their AI or their computing. What about like those other companies that, what you just say, are heading to a wrong direction, doing the wrong idea? That kind of bubble will eventually break. What do you think?
We're going to see some companies that are going to have trouble raising more money. And I think we're going to see some write-offs. We're going to see this. I think that that's going to force people to sort of ask, like, where's the high value? Where isn't it? Amazon existed pre-dot-com bubble. Amazon and some of the biggest companies were around. Oracle was there. Microsoft was there. So there have been big players. They went through the same disruption, but then they continued to grow. The question is AI a bubble? No, AI is not a bubble. It's investment. Is there a bubble of certain kinds of investment? Yes.
What kind of the signal point that you think those kind of investment bubble will eventually break in the later future?
There were some very big bets that have been made on companies, have maybe great teams, an idea of something, but the chances of that idea happening and being as disruptive as people thought are hard. I've seen a lot of money go into AI companies building things that I literally think will probably be a feature in ChatGPT or Gemini, by the end of the year.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of money going into small, like $30 million, $40, $50 million startups that I'm like, that's a vibe coding project. Like, I don't think that's a real business model. And I've seen some stuff where, because they have these projections of like, oh, and we're going to grow here. I'm like, that's a commodity. And I could be wrong, but a lot of it is like, we're also in this era of disposable software where you can go into Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini and say, hey, solve this problem for me. And it solves a problem for you. And you never needed an app. I've seen a lot of hype investing that I think is just not going to pan out.
I've talked to people who lived through the dot-com bubble era, and they just say, yeah, they know that some great companies will last, but they just worry whether when this investment bubble popped in this AI bubble now, how damaging it will be affecting to other markets.
Yeah, the best signal to look for right now is companies that have customers. If they have, and real customers, I see these, like, it depends upon like, in real growth, because I get pitches all the time, like, oh, we've got 2 million ARR or whatever. I'm like, you can get that, through, basically getting a few design partners, whatever, and getting to that. The question is like, how fast are you growing, like year over year, whatever, and to really just stepping back and looking at the space and going, is this a real space that you think that people are going to have demand for? Is this going to be just a feature of ChatGPT? One of the things, I have a firm we talk about is the idea of the runtime. Companies that are really good at taking external information and putting it back into their product and have a flywheel will do really well. That was one of the things I learned early on at OpenAI was the first person before I worked there, when I was just using GPT-3 as a developer, the first person to interview me and ask me what I thought about it was Mira Murati. And so Mira is brilliant. And so that was seen internally at OpenAI, how important they took it to listen to people talking about what things were doing. And that's continued. And so companies that have a lot of users and are taking in money and the product continues to get better, if you can go look at a product and say, hey, it was really good 6 months ago and it's great now, which is, I think, the case for ChatGPT. I think it's the case for some of the other models too, other platforms, then, I think there's a pretty good future there. But if the product's pretty much the same, I've seen some AI companies put out products that a year ago, I go look at a year later, I'm like, how are you an AI company? This should be getting faster. This should be getting better faster.
I think part of the reason people talk about AI bubble is because there are many wrong investments in wrong companies that are just saying that they are doing something with AI, but they are actually not. Yeah. So I think that's why people are having this talk of AI bubble. But I don't think that people will be able to give up on AI later on because it has been interfaced with us so deeply nowadays.
Nobody gave up on the internet after the dot-com bubble. It was only bad companies. It was only companies that couldn't raise more money because they didn't have customers and didn't have a likable path to the future. And remember, Google had its IPO like 2 years after, right? And one of the most successful post-internet companies came after. They had to wait a little bit because people were like, oh, we don't know. And it was just nobody gave up on the internet, and we've gone through this before, like electricity. There were electrical utilities. There was this huge build out to try to build back, 125 years ago to build a lot of that. And some of that investment panned out. The railroads ran, when America was building the railroad system, railroads at the time were very expensive because of the amount of steel you had to lay down and were barely getting by. When Andrew Carnegie came up with, developed a more efficient process for producing steel and lowered the cost of steel production, the railroads all of a sudden became very successful. They weren't a bad idea. They were just very expensive. But once you brought the cost of steel down, and there's so many things here that, like, I think we might see some sort of thing that looks like a correction or whatever. I think we're going to go past it, and a few months later, going to sail right on and just continue right on. We're going to look at things differently and then keep going.
As the AI can automate most of the daily tasks for us, and how do you think humans' role will be? Like, what ability do you think will be most scarce and most valuable in the next phase? Will it be the people who's really good to train the models, the large language models, or will it be like people who can effectively navigate and synthesize AI across different domains? What kind of talent or hybrid talent do you think will be more scarce and more valuable in the next phase?
I think a lot of areas that we think are kind of really niche will become more in demand, and that's always been the case. An example I give is that 3,000 years ago, when 99% of everybody was involved in agriculture, teaching and being a professor, nobody was a professor. There's no such thing. And then you have all of a sudden this thing that makes it now all of a sudden people can leave farms and do other jobs. All of a sudden these small things became big things, and certain kinds of expertise became more in demand. Teaching was an example of that. Was literally all of a sudden, I don't need my kids to learn how to work on a farm. I need them to count and do math. I need them to do that. Just looking within the AI industry alone and saying, what's becoming more and more demand. Part of it is understanding how to take human knowledge and put it into the AI systems. And it went from first, like, just having it read books, but a lot of our knowledge is not implicitly laid out in books. There's an entire reason that we have people who are students of business who try to understand how a business works, and a business is a system. Now we're trying to figure out how entire systems work. How does a medical journal work? If you think about that, like, well, people just send papers into the medical journal and does it. Like, yeah, but there's people doing medical research, and often we might think the medical journal was science, but like, no, that's actually just the last step of the scientific process. So trying to figure out how you capture all those different sorts of steps along the way and put them in silicon is a big question. And we're seeing more companies emerge where people are trying to think about, like, how do I build an AI scientist, and how do I teach it to think along things and do this? We often ask, like, where are the jobs of the future? Most of the jobs of the future are the jobs today. It's just the tools change. A teacher 30 years ago may not have had to use a computer, didn't have to use online cloud storage, didn't have to use Google Sheets, didn't have to use all these tools. If we showed them the tools of a teacher today used 30 years ago, they would think that was an IT job. They're like, am I a software engineer? Like, no, this is just teaching. This is how you teach kids, use these sorts of tools. All of our jobs are moving that way. And I think that a lot of things when it comes to like building, more sophisticated models, it's going to be, the tools may change again, but again, the job is the same. Is I got to take information here, figure out how to explain it and put it over here.
So you don't think that the future job thing or talent required for the market going to be narrow because AI develops and better?
I think it increases. I think that the more you can do with compute and the more you want to have people thinking about it, the better. Like the thing I say now is answers are cheap, questions are hard. Like you got to figure out really good questions. And we've had this experience. I saw this when we first rolled out GPT-3, which at the time, incredibly capable model, just beyond. It felt like science fiction, but I would open up this workspace, which wasn't the message format. It was just a blank document. And I'd do these demos. I'd tell people like, okay, now what do you want to do? And people would be like, I don't know. And then we had to put it into Chat GPT for people to understand. Well, you ask it questions, you get answers, you paste in documents, you do this. And I think that as we start to think about, there's a lot of things that you do at $1 billion organization, like you do internal research. You might hire scientists in economics to study your marketplace. You would never do that at $1 million corporation because there just wasn't enough people or talent to do that. Now you can do that with AI. You can have one person be a researcher or teach all of your employees how to be researchers. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of companies are going to look like research companies. And I think that a lot of jobs we're going to feel like, you think about how often now when you use Chat GPT, we went beyond Google search to now doing research. If you're using deep research to doing, deep research is this wonderful tool. And I know people who never would have thought of themselves as researchers are now doing, consulting firm level kinds of research using these tools. And I think that's going to become much more common, which we're going to expand what we can do.
We've heard that many big tech companies like Amazon has been laying off many of their employees. And there's been a saying that these big tech companies are laying off their employees in return for more computing powers. I was just wondering that the big tech company will pivot their direction of their budget or their resources to more computing power. Perhaps those people will be shift from their original jobs, but to do more deep research.
Ideally, I think that'll have the best economic outcome. So, and it's funny because sometimes companies will do, I think, kind of like dumb moves. Sometimes it's necessary because often they're thinking on a quarterly basis. When I first started OpenAI in 2020, there was 150 people. Now there are thousands of people there, and the tools have gotten even better. And people would go, if the tools are so good, why do you have to hire so many people? I'm like, that's a false equivalency. It's like, if something's so good, why are you using it so often? It's about growth. And there are things that AI is good at, and there are things that people are good at. When you have really capable people doing things that AI cannot do, and you give them AI, then all of a sudden you do more stuff. So some companies are expanding. Some companies are looking at for growth strategies. Like I think the CEO of Walmart just brought up, they're looking at a growth strategy to say like, okay, can we grow more with AI? Some companies will be very narrow and go, okay, how can I increase profits next quarter? Like, oh, I know, I'll cut costs. That's smart, but you're not growing. You're just selling to the same number of customers and reducing your costs. That doesn't help you 10 years out. As AI becomes cheaper, as AI becomes commoditized, what is the most valuable resource? Really networked humans that know how to use it, have good relationships with other people, and who have a lot of surface area to problems and can come up with new ways in which you can provide products. So that's sort of my thinking, is that like your short term people go, okay, I'll just replace it with AI. Well, the long term bet is I'm going to get a lot of people who are very highly social, have highly specialized areas of knowledge and access to special networks, and give them access to AI and just grow.
Yes, the demand will gradually moving towards human interface in this work scene or what it needs.
I'll give you an example. This was just something just came onto my radar today because I put out an article talking about this, but it talked about the general point. A friend of mine brought this up do you ever remember the movie Moneyball? It was based on the book, and the idea there was that there was this tendency in baseball that you could actually look at spreadsheets and figure out how to build a team and do this, right? And so it was a strategy that basically how to find the best players. You look deep into the stats, you saw this.
Yes.
Well, eventually every team did it. Every team started doing that, could look at the same numbers and use the same algorithms. So then the advantage of having scouts who are actually out there in the field watching players and finding out what they really were capable, things that weren't in the spreadsheets. And that's now you have more human scouts working in baseball than you did before, because all of a sudden we reached this level of equivalency. And you're going to see that with AI, where any company can deploy some AI tool, do this, whatever. And you're going to think, okay, what do I need? Like if I have a consulting firm, I can ask ChatGPT all I want about Taiwan. But I'm probably better off going to Taiwan and finding a team in Taiwan to go work with me to help me understand the Taiwanese market. And I think that's the thing that people have to start to realize, that these answers are great, but also, the networks, the people, all this super, super matter.
Yeah, that's a very good example. The founding the talent, the people who found the talent will be gradually more important, and be good with what they are doing will eventually be developed by those scouts.
The danger is, I am very, very bullish on the future. I very much think that we have a possibility where we can have even greater employment rates, greater jobs, whatever, for people. The challenges come in a couple places. If you have what we call a black box job, where basically you get an email, you respond to it, email in, respond, and you're anonymous to the organization, and your network of the people you know is irrelevant to it. Well, those are easy to replace with AI. We saw call center jobs. If I have to call somebody up, I don't care who's on the other phone. I don't even want to call somebody to do that. But where somebody because there's information to have, because you have to go to a conference to know this thing. I want to do business with this other company, and I need to know who the head of sales is there.
Yes, indeed. Asian culture, there's been a saying that we should be more focused on STEAM subjects instead of liberal arts like history or creativity sides won't matter in this AI future world. I think there are people who still would like to invest their energy and time doing these.
40%, like something like 40% of the internet traffic after 6 p.m. is Netflix in the United States. Okay.
Yeah.
Which, if you want to say, what is the economy? Well, I can tell you after 6 p.m. it's Squid Games. It's my dad watches a lot of Korean television now, which is something I didn't think was going to happen. But now you look at this world of so much of what you go like, we're going to build all this fiber. Well, it turned out the fiber was so we could watch, K-pop Demon Hunters. It was so we could watch like these kinds of crazy things. And so I think that we're in this world where it becomes, technologists very easily forget about culture. We often forget about it because we get focused on hardware and specifications, and we see autonomous robots like, looks like a person, people are doomed. I'm like, Taylor Swift did her tour, and it was $1 billion tour, and people paid incredible amounts of money for terrible seats, went into credit card debt to go watch her sing from the back of the auditorium or the back of the stadium, and loved it. And so much of human culture is these things. And so I think that we often, when we think about like, again, it's hard. If you're a parent, like, do I want my kid to be, going to STEM or be an artist? STEM, at least I have an idea of where their career is going to be headed. But I would say, culturally speaking, I lived in Japan in the 1990s, and I remember going to stores and seeing all the manga there and thinking, this is really interesting. I can't see why this isn't popular in America. It turned out it was going to be very, very popular in America. Somebody's had to bother to bring it over there. And so we see that I would say that in some cases, it's like some of the dominance of Asian cultures culturally have almost been accidental or inadvertent. Was just these things just sort of existed. And others were like, yeah, I like this too.
Yes, what we've been discussing is kind of like, after AI can tackle most of the daily tasks or even like junior tasks for us, human will gradually notice that how much we value, we long for human connections and human interactions. That will eventually move us to valuing more of the culture thing and culture needs in our society.
I did an interview, so I host the OpenAI podcast. So I did an interview with Jakub Bahatsky, who's the head scientist at OpenAI. Jakub is very brilliant, very sweet, very sincere. And I asked him a question, kind of rhetorical. I mean, I knew kind of had the answer to it, but he talked about a teacher he had, because he went to a magnet school for computer science along with his friend Simon Zidor. And I asked them about ask Jakub, I said, well, people use ChatGPT as a tutor. Do you see that people are just going to use AI teachers in the future? And Jakub laughed that off, because his point was like, these are great tutors and they're great ways to help us learn. But to have a human invested in your success, particularly like he had a wonderful teacher, they actually did the documentary about him, that inspires you. That's something different than a robot does. And like I have people like, oh, I can make a robot could be inspiring. Like, yes, it would be an actor. It would be like me paying an actor to go into a school and do that. The moment I find out it's an actor, that feels fake and not real. But when it's a real person who has real experience, who really did something, went out into the world, either taught math for 20 years or had some other experience, that gives value. And those things we often forget that like our economy is about trading value. Money is one of the ways that we do that. But we can get rid of money and we'd still be trading time. We'd still be trading other sorts of things with people. And there's so much value in having, nobody goes to their doctor. I've never had a friend go to the doctor and said, he spent too much time with me. Like he kept asking me questions and it was like, you get to spend a minute, and so we know that we want more time with people of value. Even when the technology gets better, we're still going to want to have another human explain things to us, provide relevancy to us, and give us a sense of, value and trust.
Yes. I think trust and human connections is what people gradually realize that they really value.
I don't know how it is in Taiwan, but like when I lived in Japan, when I would do business or work with people, I spent way more time hanging out with them socially than I did discussing business terms. It was, we're going to go to the cliched, but go to the karaoke bar. We're going to, go there and hang out. And then it would be like, oh, let's do the deal. Oh, we already did the deal. We're good.
Taiwan is the saying that people spend more time bonding and connecting, knowing each other than the time they actually talk about business. It will probably just be a small amount.
I think there's something, in Asian cultures that I think is really worth people sort of understanding that that is present in other cultures, but they haven't drawn a circle around it and said and make it a formality, and how important that really is. In America, you joke, it's like play golf with people to do deals on the golf course, or UK, it's friends who met at Eton, whatever. And I think that's a thing that people are going to start to realize, like, oh, we didn't just do the deal with the company because we thought we'd make money together. That was the given. We did the deal because culturally we liked the interaction between our two cultures, because it was going to be interesting and novel. We wanted to see what we were going to make.
Really great to have the talk with you, and I'll read your article.
Okay, awesome. Well, great talking to you all.
Thank you.